Hello, everyone. I am Jacob Winograd. I'm the host of the Biblical Anarchy podcast here at the Libertarian Christian Institute. And if you're here watching this live and not the audio later, you're here with us live in the LCI Green Room. This is our live show. This is where we do interviews often and sometimes debates like we're doing tonight. I have two gentlemen here who I like quite a lot here to debate kind of an odd resolution, but an important one that's sure to touch on topics that I think need to be talked about, things going on both in the movement and the party, broadly speaking. I have Liquid Zulu, who hosts the channel Liquid Zulu, and he does anarcho-capitalist content talking about libertarian ethics and economics. And then I have Dan Sanchez here from FEE, or the Foundation for Economic Education. Happy to have you both with us here tonight. I wanted to give you guys an opportunity before we get into tonight's topic, though, just to introduce yourselves a bit more for my audience, since I've collaborated with Zulu, but that's more on his end. This is the first time I've had either of you here on the LCI end. So, Zulu, why don't you go ahead and just give yourself a minute introduction?
Sure. So I'm Liquid Zulu. I run obviously the Liquid Zulu YouTube channel, and recently, I posted a big old video attacking Dave Smith, who is a very prominent, famous libertarian. All of us know about Dave Smith. This is because I believe that Dave Smith is a great archetype of something which I think is very damaging to the movement, namely pragmatism. I think pragmatism was supposed to have gotten rid of back when the Mises Caucus was taking off. They failed to get rid of it. In fact, they became the pragmatists. So that's going to be the sort of nugget of this debate tonight.
All right. Thank you for that. Dan, go ahead and introduce yourself as well for us.
Sure, yeah. I'm Dan Sanchez. I've been a libertarian and an anarcho-capitalist since the mid-2000s. In the early 2010s, I worked at the Mises Institute, and for the past 9 years, I've been working at the Foundation for Economic Education, or FEE. Just a plug, we are recruiting candidates for the Hazlitt Fellowship, which is a program that Liquid Zulu himself went through. And so if you go to fee.org/Hazlitt hyphen fellowship, that I would really like to have principled libertarians apply for that. I'm a fan of the Libertarian Christian Institute, as I'm a libertarian Christian myself, and I'm a fan of Liquid Zulu because I really enjoyed working with him in the Hazlitt Fellowship, and I was very impressed with him. And I'm also a fan of Dave Smith. I'm a regular listener to his podcast. I pretty much listen to every episode. Beyond thinking that he's a force for good, I regard him as a hero. But I'll be trying to convince Liquid Zulu of the more moderate case of just the force for good. So looking forward to it.
Yes, and we'll be getting to that in a moment. Of course, you brought up the Hazlitt internship, and I always make a joke with people that no matter where you're at in my house, there will probably be 3 books in the room with me. First, there's always going to be a Bible, and there's probably, like right there, several apologist Bibles on the shelf behind me and some more off to the side. Because I'm with LCI, there's always going to be a copy of Faith-Seeking Freedom, Libertarian Christian Answers to Tough Questions, which the second edition of this book is underway, and it'll be out sometime next year. And then there's almost always a copy of Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt, because I think a while back, they probably do this still, the Mises Institute will be like, hey, do you want free copies of this book to distribute? And I always get a whole box full, because in my town and in my county, and if you guys have these in your area, you should do this too. They have those little pop-up free libraries where you can just take a book and leave a book. And so I'm always going to these free libraries and leaving Economics in One Lesson, because it's just, that's just a really simple way to spread libertarian propaganda, I think. So, but yes, tonight's resolution is a weird one. And I'm going to maybe just take a minute here just to make some opening remarks as the moderator, because I respect debate. I did debate in school, and I am going to be a very moderate moderator. but I am not moderate on this topic. I love Dave Smith. I consider Dave a friend. Doesn't mean I always agree with him. And sometimes, like any good friend, there's times where you got each other's back, and then there's times where like you think someone, the other person's wrong, and you argue it out. But I think Dave Smith is a force for good and a libertarian. But that doesn't mean he's above criticism. And since Zulu's video caused a stir and Dan wanted to defend it, I was happy to host and moderate this debate slash. I hope it's friendly. I think everyone here is friendly with each other. So even though it's a debate, hopefully it's going to be sticking to the substance and not be anything like blood sports or name calling or anything like that. I see a lot of you are already in the comments. Someone had made a comment earlier, which I don't even see anymore, saying that we always start late, which is true. Also, I see many people in the comments saying, well, actually just one person who keeps on saying that it's impossible for Christians to be libertarians. Well, get Faith Seeking Freedom. Again, I'll plug that book and let me know what you think. But that's not what we're here to debate tonight. I will be giving, I think it's usually, we didn't actually decide on order, but unless you object, Zulu, usually the affirmative goes first. So the resolution is Dave Smith is a force for good. And so I will give Dan the floor here to give his opening statement. We agreed to 7-minute opening statements, and then I believe 7-minute rebuttals. And then from that point, we will then head into more of an open-ended cross-examination where I'm going to try to let them kind of freely ask each other questions and talk to one another, with me interjecting if I feel like we need to refocus or if one person's talking over the other one. But I'll try to be as infrequent in my moderation as possible. All right, Dan, the floor is yours.
All right. So Leonard Read wrote that war is liberty's greatest enemy. Randolph Bourne wrote an essay, a very influential one called The State, in which he made the case that war is the health of the state. In times of war, people, quote, proceed to allow themselves to be regimented, coerced, deranged in all the environments of their lives, and turned into a solid manufactory of destruction toward whatever other people may have in the appointed scheme of things come within the range of the government's disapprobation. The citizen throws off his contempt and indifference to government, identifies himself with its purposes, revives all his military memories and symbols, and the state once more walks an august presence through the imaginations of men. Murray Rothbard wrote, "It is in war that the state really comes into its own, swelling in power, in number, in pride, in absolute dominion over the economy and the society." And in a letter, he wrote that he believed that the war-peace question is the key to the whole libertarian business. And I think that that is really relevant to this debate because Dave Smith has been a hugely influential voice for many libertarian causes, but especially the anti-war one. And I contend that his anti-war advocacy alone, just by itself, has been so impactful for the good that it alone qualifies him as a force for good. And whatever disagreements you might have with him, whatever errors he might make philosophically, strategically, in terms of communication, that those are outweighed certainly by his impact on the anti-war cause. And so just to give some examples of the type of communication that he does in advancing peace, on Joe Rogan, the top podcast in the world, one of the top media platforms in the world, he regularly makes moral cases against war. So the typical example is one time on Rogan, he said, let's say somebody broke onto your property and killed your family members, and you want to go kill this guy. If he goes back to his apartment building and there's women and children inside, and your move is to blow up the building, well, what you'd be charged with is murder in the first degree. You dropped a bomb knowing innocent people were going to die. That is by definition intentional. So that's just a very accessible, straightforward moral case for making the case that, like, as Frederick Bastiat would say, that governments in the name of individuals are not allowed morally to do anything that individuals themselves are morally allowed to do. And it reaches people. Someone on the Rogan subreddit posted a clip of him making that kind of an argument, and he said, "I'm personally on the fence about the conflict, seeing as it's a horrendous situation altogether. But Dave Smith's anecdote halfway through this episode is quite compelling and smart. An anecdote indeed, but nonetheless morally compelling." So I think the reason why he gets has a lot of influence is because he is compelling to listeners in this way. And he's also compelling to not only to his own audience, but to other big voices and their audiences. So he's appeared on shows like Rogan, other kind of center people like Piers Morgan's show. On the left, he's appeared on with people like the Young Turks, Cenk Uyghur and Anna Kasparian, but he also has on people like Max Blumenthal. And on the right, he has been on Tucker Carlson. He's had Tucker Carlson on his show. He has also done shows with Candace Owens, and he's been very influential for them. Candace Owens said that Dave Smith was pivotal in her turn away from war and towards non-interventionism. And right now, we're seeing a huge civil war on the right, with people on the populist right really going against what they see as Trump's betrayal and as much of the right's betrayal to America First and the non-interventionist cause. A lot of them are followers of Tucker Carlson and Candace Owen. And so he has laid a lot of the groundwork for this. And so again, just by the standards of making the case against war, moving the needle against war, moving people in the left, right, center against war, he's had a huge influence. I think it's undeniable, and for that reason, I think Dave Smith is a force for good.
All righty. Thank you, Dan. You were at 6 minutes and 11 seconds, so you had time to spare, but happy to save us a little bit of time, more for the cross-ex. I do see some people leaving some super chats and comments. I'll leave them for a little bit later. We will be doing a Q&A section later as part of the cross-ex, so if you guys want to put questions in the comments related to this subject, I will get to them when we're in that section. But Zulu, go ahead. I will start the timer whenever you are ready.
Absolutely. I was just making sure that my audio is working, because there were some complaints with that before. So hopefully this is all fine.
Sound good on my end.
Cool. So hopefully that works. So our topic of debate tonight is whether Dave Smith is a force for good. I maintain that Dave is not a force for good by the libertarian standard of the good that we all accept. First, any past good that Dave has done, which is not reflected in his more recent pragmatist strategy, is not relevant. I accept that Dave and the Mises Caucus were a very positive force when they were starting out. They were able to completely oust the old pragmatists and promised to bring the liberty movement into the Libertarian Party. That is, to make the LP adopt a radicalist strategy that would not adulterate the message on the altar of what works. Dave would himself refute the pragmatist strategy in a debate against Nick Sarwark, saying that what is paramount to him is the philosophy of libertarianism, explicitly endorsing the Ron Paul strategy, which he says is to be principled and courageous. Indeed, Dave is entirely correct in this argument. Pragmatism, by its nature, is simply incapable of converting people to libertarianism. Libertarianism is the philosophy of the non-aggression principle. Libertarians hold the NEP as the fundamental moral principle guiding man on what to do with respect to conflicts. Pragmatism rejects that there can be such a thing as a moral principle in the first place. On pragmatism, the true is simply that which works. That is, something is true if it leads to desirable outcomes to hold it as true. Taken seriously, this claim wipes out the entire branch of ethics. If the true is that which satisfies the purposes of consciousness, then this is the case for logic itself. So the purposes we are speaking about must be mere pre-logical whims. That is, the pragmatist ethics terminates in a "but I want it." Therefore, if someone wants to violate the non-aggression principle, or any moral principle, pragmatism takes this as the immutable given, that all other analysis must proceed from. Here there can be no moral principles guiding man on what he should want. Rather, any principles must be adulterated, warped, discarded, wherever is required to suit one's arbitrary whims. Dave has now wholeheartedly endorsed the philosophy of pragmatism, and therefore is incapable of being a force for good by libertarian standards. To show that Dave is indeed a force for good, my opponent would have to refute the philosophy of libertarianism and prove the philosophy of pragmatism. A tall order indeed, considering the pragmatists themselves would reject that there's such a concept as the good in the first place. Pragmatism is the opposite of principles. These schools are simply irreconcilable. As Dave says with respect to libertarians who support open borders, I think that there's something about being so married to ideology that you will support something that's so obviously right in front of your face going to be a disaster for so many people, including your own cause. So, the standard of the true is whether it would be disastrous for so many people or our cause. What does it mean for something to be disastrous to a cause? It means that people stop believing in that cause. So open borders is false because it would make people not believe in open borders. That is, the whims of the egregore are taken as the standard of truth. Dave would reassert his neo-pragmatism in a previous episode of this very podcast, stating that if the radical open borders stance was correct by libertarian theory, then he would simply reject libertarianism. So, Dave's immutable desires take precedence over the philosophy of libertarianism. Libertarian principles are correct if and insofar as they conform to his whims. This is pragmatism through and through. Dave's pragmatist philosophy has driven him to accepting conclusions which are obviously at odds with the non-aggression principle. He says, the answer is, take our fucking entire military and put them on our border and secure our border. He would double down on this sentiment a few weeks later. I'm really glad that I said what I said on Clint's podcast. I stand by everything I said, but when I said bring the entire military home and put it on the border, sorry, that's a fucking win. He would continue to support this view even after Trump's totalitarianism was made clear. I'm all for shutting this shit down by any means necessary. The mass deportation game is a very risky game to play, and it's very difficult logistically to get it done. Americans do not like seeing violence against people in the country. Hopefully Trump can do this in a savvy way. So he knows full well that he's endorsing a policy against the supposed will of the American people, which would require massive state intervention, desiring that the entire US military help out. And his only hope is that Trump is savvy enough to actually get it done. Get it done by any means necessary. Could there be a less libertarian term than that? The NEP is literally supposed to tell you which actions are licit. Necessity be damned. The goal of mass deportations is not the primary. We should not enforce that by any means necessary. If that is a goal you wish to achieve, libertarianism tells you that you must do it through only non-aggressive means. If it is necessary to violate people's rights to deport them, Dave would support this in the face of the NEP, by his own admission. But perhaps his pragmatism still has some positive impact, even if he is duty-bound to reject the very concept of the good. Perhaps he is an unwitting fool in being a force for the good, rather than an active champion of it. One such claim is that though Dave may have endorsed pragmatism, he is still swaying the needle towards liberty, still getting people into the tent, and thus still pushing movement forwards. I regard this claim as logically equivalent to claims that printing off a bunch of fiat money is a positive for the economy because it brings in a bunch of investments that otherwise would not have occurred. As we all know in the economic case, this merely creates a boom period that is followed by an inevitable bust. I hold that the business cycle is merely one instantiation of a much broader principle, the cycle of evasion. That is, wherever and whenever one is attempting to generate any manner of fiat goodies which don't actually exist, eventually we reach a breaking point, where reality swoops in and demonstrates that one was operating upon false premises. This leads to the inevitable bust, where one must either pick up the pieces and start taking reality as the standard, or simply evade again to get another boom going. The libertarian case is that the people whom Dave herds into the movement are not actually libertarians. They are not adherents of the non-aggression principle, or any manner of radical for capitalism. They are fiat libertarians. An influx of such sheep people does indeed give us a lovely libertarian boom. Perhaps many people attend the conferences, and many people watch the podcasts and go to the shows, but this was all for naught. The bust is revealed when this intellectual ballast has done such harm that the radicals become ever more disinterested, and the movement loses ever more momentum. One is faced with innumerable adulterations and misunderstandings of the theory. Our messaging becomes weak and fragmented, and the biggest voices end up using their megaphone to call for even more chaff, disregarding the remnant entirely. This is surely as big of a departure from the Ron Paul strategy as one can make, insulting the remnant and telling them to be more practical, whilst cozying up to every former professional leftist and current environmental communist one can find, so long as they are on the right side of the culture war. Dave is not a force for good, certainly not by libertarian standards. He is duty-bound by his own philosophy to reject the very concept of the good, and the effect he is having is to sap the vanguard of the last of their vigor in favor of fiat libertarians who have had L-word passes hastily stuffed into their coat pockets to go out and preach the message that libertarians do not care about principles. How far we have fallen indeed.
Sorry, I'm muted there. You were pretty much right at what you expected you would be at, Zulu, so well done. We will now move into rebuttals. So, Dan, if you are ready, you can begin with your first rebuttal, and I'll start the timer. We're keeping these at 7 minutes as well, so whenever you're ready.
So, like I said, Dave Smith has been really influential for the anti-war cause. That is defending liberty. I mean, there are massive rights violations that are involved with war. And whatever you think of his philosophical justification for moving the needle in that way, he is defending the rights of innocence. That is a libertarian cause. That is good for in the context of the libertarian framework. That's a separate question from whether his advocacy of those rights, those innocence, is philosophically consistent with what one thinks is the correct basis for libertarianism. And so, basically, to prove me wrong, you'd have to prove that all of those things that you just listed outweigh his impact on against war. A few issues that I have with what you said. I think that the pragmatism, there are two definitions, or two broad definitions. Now in your video, you really talk about like the philosophical school of pragmatism. And then there's the everyday definition of pragmatism. I've never seen Dave Smith endorse the former. And everyone, to some extent, is pragmatic, according to the latter definition. I don't think there's any inconsistency with pragmatism in the latter definition and principle. I've never seen Dave Smith endorse violations of principle for the sake of some kind of like contrary pragmatism. So I just don't see that as being well grounded. With open borders, I agree with you. I mean, I'm open borders, and so I disagree with him. But that's not his focus. He spends vastly more time on the foreign policy question and has vastly more influence on that question than on the borders question. And let's see, what else did you say? Oh, and also with regard to the philosophy, so there's this whole question of bringing libertarians in the movement, growing the understanding of libertarianism. That is also hugely important, and in the long run, more important for me than sort of like the immediate case of like stopping wars and protecting innocence. Again, in the long run, I think that even if it wasn't in a way that was consistent with like building a libertarian movement in the long run, that what he's doing, even if it wasn't furthering that, is still a huge force for good, because there are real innocents getting murdered right now. And but I will also point out that he leads a lot of people to Austrian economics, to Ron Paul, to Scott Horton. And so he's referring to these principles, and he is rooting his arguments in what he regards as principles. And like with the example that I gave, I think that he does do a good job, not a perfect job. So you've made criticisms of that, but again, my overarching point is that his anti-war advocacy is undeniably a force for good.
Alrighty. Sorry here. Let me switch out of that. All right. Zulu, if you are ready, you can go ahead and start your rebuttal.
Sure. So I definitely agree that anti-war advocacy is itself good, but that does not mean that Dave Smith is fundamentally a force for good. Dave is pushing a more primary error here, and that primary error is pragmatism. Pragmatism is the very basis for U.S. foreign policy. So he's inadvertently pushing the world in a more socialist, warlike direction. So why is pragmatism the basis for U.S. foreign policy? Look at any statement by any of these generals or anything. It's, oh, we got to get this done now. We got to solve this situation of the day right now. Iran is 3 weeks away from a nuke. They have been for the past 10 years, guys. But this is a crisis in this moment that we need to solve. Pragmatism is the basis. And so Dave is pushing this more fundamental error that is used as justification for the war machine. So it really doesn't matter that he then negates this error higher up in his philosophy, because as we've seen throughout the history of philosophy, it is the more fundamental thing that a philosopher is pushing, the more fundamental that their philosophy is, that is the part which survives. If they have some remote deviation, it dies off relatively quickly in terms of the history of philosophy. And moreover, Dave explicitly wants martial law in the US. This is not a consistent anti-war advocacy, as we would expect from a pragmatist. He wants to solve the issue at the border today. He doesn't care about principles when it comes to the border. So he wants the entire US military to be used against the US population, destroying the last bastion of capitalism on planet Earth. This is in no way anti-war. So even if, well, maybe he's a good guy, like maybe he's a force for good because he's anti-war, but he isn't actually anti-war. He is anti-war in the Middle East, perhaps, but he's pro-war in the US, war against US citizens. That is terrible. So let's see here. Yeah, Dave will never fail to fall for the propaganda that will end up pushing the needle to war. It ends up working in favor of these war hawks. So he's fundamentally impotent in that issue. So Dave has been influential for the anti-war cause, and that is defending liberty. But yeah, again, so he is pushing the more fundamental philosophy that is leading to the war hawks in the first place. You also said that it doesn't matter what the correct basis for libertarianism is. Pardon? I need to prove that the things I list outweighs impact for the anti-war cause. So it definitely matters. So this is based on Leonard Peikoff's philosophical theory of history, that the thing which drives history is the philosophy of the day. Now, how do you get about a new philosophy of the day? Well, what you do is, it depends on the fundamentals. So if you're looking at Descartes, now Descartes, he had the cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am, right? But that is not the core of his philosophy. That I regard as a complete deviation from his philosophy. If he was being consistent, he would just be a pure skeptic, total skeptic. And in fact, that's exactly what happens after Descartes comes about. His method of Cartesian doubt is what survives, not his, oh, but now we can deduce everything we want. And in fact, the method of trying to deduce everything we want, that also, it wasn't to get into this, oh, we're caring about the real world, we're caring about validating the real world, it ended up just devolving into total and utter rationalism, which we saw with Immanuel Kant and all the terrible things that he ended up doing. And then you said that Dave isn't pushing the philosophy of pragmatism. He's a pragmatic in a more colloquial sense. Dave absolutely, definitely is a pragmatist. So, for instance, he explicitly says that if libertarianism leads to things that he doesn't like, then he would reject libertarianism. So, how do we analyze that? Well, we say, so it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. It matters whether it satisfies his desires. So the desires are taken as a more fundamental thing, which is the very basic pragmatism. Now, I agree, Dave does not know a whole lot about pragmatism. Most pragmatists don't. Most people don't know a whole lot about the philosophy they're pushing, but he is still pushing that philosophy. And this is also true for any advocacy he does for Austrian economics. He is undercutting the whole basis of Austrian economics, because you cannot have Austrian economics or any economic theory on pragmatism. You can't have any general economic theory, because it depends on, well, what is the situation of the day? Maybe this economic theory doesn't work anymore. We gotta get out there and try, guys. So yeah, that's everything I got.
All right, then we will now move into cross-examination. Probably start by giving the floor to Dan to ask a question, and then Zulu can respond, and then I'll ask Zulu to probably do the same thing, and then from there, just kind of let you guys start, conversing back and forth, and I'll interject only as I maybe want to try to move the conversation. Like if you guys seem to like, repeating things, kind of like, all right, we've kind of hashed that on, let's try something else. I'll try to keep us moving through the topics as I see fit. But Dan, if you want to go ahead and start, if you want to have a question that you would like to ask Zulu, let's do that.
Great. So I disagree with the contention that pragmatism underlies Dave Smith's anti-war advocacy. He's definitely not just an opponent of war in the Middle East. That he has opposed the war in Ukraine, and he's definitely has a moral basis for his opposition to war, not a pragmatic basis. So just as an example, again, of the kind of principled cases against, like moral-based cases against war that he makes in another Piers Morgan debate. He was debating with Dean Cain, and who was trying to make the case that ethnic cleansing in Palestine was legitimate because of what Hamas did on October 7th. And his response was, I always find this fascinating because somehow Americans could say this about the people in Hamas and go like, I wouldn't like to be kicked out of my neighborhood, but if my government had done October 7th, I'd accept it. And then your government, Dean, destroyed Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Somalia, Yemen, the drone bombing campaign in Pakistan. So can you get kicked out of your house now? Is it not ethnic cleansing if we were to kick you out of your neighborhood? This is so ridiculous that we impose these standards on these poor people that we would never dream of holding ourselves to that standard. It just logically makes absolutely no sense. And it doesn't really matter what Hamas's approval rating is, in the same way that it doesn't matter that George W. Bush had record high approval ratings. That doesn't mean that the innocent civilians in the United States of America are fair game, and neither should any other group of civilians.
Dan, if you're done, that's fine. I was going to say, if you could try to boil that down to a question, or if you just want Zulu to respond to you, that's fine. I was just trying to.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. So my point there is that he's making moral arguments that it's not a pragmatic argument of, in the same way that like the foreign policy establishment says like, oh, well, this is what I just want to do for my whims and ends.
So if I can help here, is your question to Zulu, like, you just explained Dave's, overview of his arguments for how he opposes war, and you're saying, like, don't these seem more like moral arguments and not pragmatic arguments? Is that basically
Exactly
what you're okay? Yeah, Zulu, do you want to go ahead and respond?
Sure. So Dave Smith, like any pragmatist, at least unless they're super consistent, uh, he has a hodgepodge of philosophies. He doesn't have a consistent worldview at all. So perhaps yes, he does make moral arguments in some cases, but he more fundamentally rejects that morality can even be a thing in the first place. And what matters is, well, what's more fundamental. So it doesn't matter that he isn't using his pragmatism to denounce wars in Ukraine or the Middle East or wherever else. He is using his pragmatism to advocate for war in the US. And this is exactly what happens with any of these sorts who don't know their philosophy, who haven't thought deeply about philosophy at all. They end up just bundling together a bunch of random positions. And well, what survives from that? It's whatever is most fundamental. And what's most fundamental is the epistemology. That's the most fundamental aspect of his philosophy. I don't know what the hell his metaphysical beliefs are. I think he's some vague religious person, but he's not very clear about that. But yeah, so the most fundamental thing that he's actually very clear about is the pragmatism.
Again, we're debating whether he's a force for good, and again, um, even if taking for granted that what he's advocating with his immigration stance is a case for war, that's not where he's focusing on, and that's not where he's influential. And he's influential, like the actual impact that he's having is turning a lot of people against foreign wars. And he's not his what people are looking to him is not as a philosopher, like in the same way that like you like talk about Kant, or you could talk about like Hume or some other philosopher, and then you could talk about someone like Richard Cobden, who's making a case for for free trade. It's like, okay, well, what if he had some sort of like, what if he was influenced by some like backward philosopher, and that was what was underlying it? Well, we're not looking to Richard Cobden as a philosopher. We're looking to him. The society was looking to him for this other thing. And if that main focus and that main impact is good, then he has been a force for good.
Zulu, go ahead.
Sure. So yeah, I'm saying that indeed he's not a force for good because of this more fundamental advocacy of pragmatism, and the reason for this is because a century or so from now, nobody's going to remember Dave Smith going on Piers Morgan to talk about how Israel shouldn't nuke a billion brown people. Nobody's going to remember or care about that. What they will remember or care about is what is the libertarian movement saying about this, and they really are looking. People are looking towards the libertarian movement to see what philosophy is being preached here. And Dave has been using his position as a figurehead in the libertarian movement to basically destroy the vanguard, kill off any chances of reaching the remnant. That's a far greater deadly poison to be having than any of his advocacy against foreign wars. Because if he is successful and does indeed kill off the libertarian movement, well, gee whiz, where else can you turn? The objectivists, they're all war hawks. Like the war hawks can just win out then. And I think if the libertarian movement dies off, objectivism is also in a poor position there. And if objectivism also dies off, then we just live in the world of Immanuel Kant and 10,000 years of darkness.
Okay. Dan, do you mind if we give Zulu a chance to ask a question?
Sure.
Zulu, do you want to go ahead and ask a question to Dan?
Sure. So I want to know whether you agree with the thesis that what is the fundamental driver of society is the philosophy of the day, and that changing the philosophy of the day is the fundamental thing, and everything else is peripheral.
I agree with that. And so I do think that the philosophical fundamentals are extremely important. But I don't think that people learn their philosophical principles so much from sort of like tracing the underlying premises of someone who's making um, uh, a case in like foreign policy, for example. Like, but what really influences them are actual philosophers who are focusing on philosophy. Like again, people didn't get their philosophy from Richard Cobden. They got it from David Hume or John Locke. And so I just think that there's a division of labor there, and there's just like a different focus. So yeah. So I like, for example, your content about. I think you've made some really compelling cases about sort of the philosophical bases of liberty. And so, when people who are students of philosophy and people who want to make the underlying grounds for philosophy, it would be great if they learned from you, especially because I believe that the kind of philosophy that you're promoting, that you can draw these anti-war conclusions from that. But I'm not going to then say that anyone who anti anti-war conclusions from a different or maybe a less grounded philosophical foundations are by that virtue a force for evil.
So sort of my main point with this is that, yeah, people aren't going to Dave Smith for philosophy, but they are going to the libertarians for philosophy, and he is being very effective at killing off the libertarian movement with his pragmatism. In what way is he not? Do you think he isn't killing off the libertarian movement? Do you think he's not being damaging to the libertarian movement with his promulgation of pragmatism?
Again, I don't see that as being his impact. Like he's not he's having conversations and making moral cases against war. Like that's his impact. Like whatever kind of and whatever kind of like strategic assumptions that he has underlying it, he's not like a super influential strategic philosopher. That's not the impact that he's having.
So, if I could interject here, I have a question for each of you, which I think will help draw this disagreement out more. Dan, if I was going to maybe ask Zulu's question in a different way, in my own words, because I don't know that I would say pragmatism, but if Dave has like an inconsistency on the border issue, and I think to various degrees, the three of us are more on the I don't know, free immigration side of things. I'm not. I've been very critical of this administration in America and ICE and mass deportations. I'm sympathetic to some of the concerns about free migration, but I think the cure is worse than the disease. Uh, so, is there a concern? I think from people like Zulu and others that if Dave is a prominent figure who's known as a libertarian, and then people start looking into libertarianism, being persuaded to think maybe I'm a libertarian, but then they're getting the idea that libertarians can be pro peace and pro private property rights, pro voluntary association, and this idea of if they even hear something of the non-aggression principle, but then they see Dave kind of arguing on the immigration side in ways that contradict this. Is this going to potentially lead to people becoming nominally libertarian, but sort of adopting the belief that it can be sort of, piecemeal, that like, and I have seen, I'm not going to go as far as to say Dave is directly responsible for this, but I think we all can probably think of people who've done this and they've like become libertarians for like a few months or a year or two, but then like there are a couple issues where they deviate from libertarianism, become so important to them that then they just go, no, screw it, I'm not a libertarian anymore. So, what would you say to that?
I think that I'm less concerned about labels and names as I am about beliefs. And so if people who call themselves libertarians, uh, because Dave Smith calls himself a libertarian, even though he, has a non-libertarian immigration perspective, that's less important to me than how people's actual beliefs are changing, and the real world impacts of those beliefs. And so if he is reaching out to people who are like anti-immigration and convincing them to be more anti-war, then that's good. I'd rather, like, whether they call themselves libertarian or not. Uh, if there's going to be a anti-immigration person, I'd rather them be an anti-war anti-immigration person.
Sure.
All
So
the way to if there's like a Nazi, I'd rather have him be like an anti-war Nazi than a pro-war Nazi, if that's even possible,
right.
and not a contradiction
So
in terms.
so
Can I
I
just
want to
jump in on that real quick?
Sure. I mean, what do you I think to maybe add a little bit to that, I think he's asking that, like, is it, if we're going to have people, like, the thing I'm interested to have you maybe answer in this is, if there's going to be people who are anti-immigration anyway, isn't it better that we convince anti-immigration people to, like, while we're also maybe trying to convince them to not be anti-immigration, to at least make them, like, I remember growing up in a Republican Party that was pro-war and anti-immigration. If they were anti-immigration and anti-war, that seems to be an upgrade. So if you want to respond to that and what he said.
Sure. So, this may well indeed be his impact outside of the libertarian movement. I don't really spend much time listening to what people outside of the libertarian movement are saying. But what matters is his impact within the libertarian movement. So, yeah, if you could make these Nazis and whatnot anti-war, fine. You could press that button. That's fine. But what matters is this isn't fundamental. What's fundamental is changing the philosophy. So any of these gains that Dave can get in these areas, they're completely temporary. In the long run, what has he done? He has killed off the libertarian philosophy. And that is far more damaging than anything, because then there won't be these libertarians around in 200 odd years to keep trying to herd more of their equivalent of Nazis into the anti-war camp. These like sort of shepherds, these shepherd philosophers, you could call them, where they're just trying to herd people under different tents. Well, that's a whole lot of work you got to do to just constantly maintain, like, for instance, in this case, an anti-war belief among the rightists, or among the Nazis, or whoever it is, right? That requires constant maintenance, because it's fundamentally, it is at odds with their more fundamental philosophy, right? Most people, their fundamental philosophy is actually leads to pro-war conclusions, right? It's all about protectionism. It's about the nation, right? Most people are either, let's take the leftists, right? The woke left, as they're called. They're absolutely pro-war. If you look at their fundamental philosophy, they require a violent revolution in order to have the next stage of humanity kick off. That you could only ever herd a leftist under the anti-war tent for so long until their fundamental philosophy breaks through, and you end up getting pro-war.
So I have another question for you, Zulu, then one for Dan, and then I'll step back, let you guys maybe interact a little bit more unmoderated. But Zulu, what do you think to this idea that there's a division of labor, like Dan said, that, perhaps it could be argued that Dave is at least, functionally good or very good on many libertarian issues, and that even if your claim that he's not as sound on the philosophy as you and others are, couldn't he be seen as a funnel who is making people who are maybe not as interested in philosophy to think in a more libertarian way on certain issues, and then bringing people into the idea of libertarianism, where then people like you, people like Dan, people like me, people like Kinsella, people like, yeah, the Mises Institute, even at, I'd say, Reason and Fee, there are other there's other people then who can, like, if you I mean, my experience was Dave introduced me to libertarianism, but then, and Dave doesn't claim to be a philosopher. He's not written books and said, you know, if I convinced you of libertarianism, you then need to read my book on, my 25 principles of libertarianism. No, he points people to Rothbard and to Hoppe and people that we would all agree are good to look at. So what do you think about that division of labor idea?
So I don't think this. I'm fine with having a division of labor in the movement. For instance, me and Praxpen will sometimes tag team a debate because he's very good at about knowing all the studies and everything that they're going to bring up, and I can bring in some of the more theory stuff. So it's a very good division of labor there. But fundamentally, that works because Praxpen isn't then saying, "Oh, and all the theory that's false, that's wrong," right? Whereas Dave is in his capacity as a funnel, he's actually selecting for people who disagree with the libertarian philosophy on a core fundamental level. They are not actually libertarians. So if he's a very successful funnel, and I think he is quite a successful funnel, he's actually funneling in either completely irrelevant chaff, which is just going to fluff up the movement and add more inertia to make it harder to keep the movement going, or he's bringing in active subverters.
Could you
both of those are
clarify?
very damaging.
Could you just clarify something really quick? As you said, he's bringing in people who don't agree with the theory, but I mean, presumably, wouldn't anyone who's not a libertarian yet, if you're trying to bring them in, not all like it just seems kind of like they're already going to not be in agreement with the theory. So I don't quite get
Well,
that.
I'm talking like on a fundamental level. He is not getting them to check their fundamental anti-libertarianism, right? He's not getting them to check those premises. Whereas if you have somebody who's actually doing Isaiah's job, someone like me, people, if they want to be a Liquid Zulu viewer, they've really, I shove it in their face. They've got to check their premises, and I name explicitly what exactly is wrong about their more fundamental beliefs. Whereas someone like Dave Smith just does not do that and cannot do that.
Not even on like war. Like you don't think he challenges their fundamental beliefs on
I
war
don't think
and
war
their
is
viewing of
fundamental. War is a hugely peripheral issue. Like it's way up there in the ethics, which is already way up there in philosophy.
Well, I'm not the debater, so I'm going to ask a question to Dan then, and then you can go back and ask any questions, Dan, you want on this. If I can actually remember the question I had for you. I actually don't remember it. So if I remember the question I had for you, Dan, I'll interject and ask it later. But if you want to go ahead and ask Zulu a question, go ahead.
Well, I was curious, Zulu, what was your intellectual evolution?
So I initially was just some vague normie leftist, right, as everybody in the UK is. And then I saw a John Stossel video recommended, and I actually watched it thinking, well, this is going to be stupid. I'll be able to debunk this. And I watched it, and I was like, yeah, no, he's actually completely correct. And then from Stossel, I ended up finding a channel called Michael Moreno, and he had this one video where he's discussed how the Supreme Court ruling on anti-LGBT discrimination was actually wrong. So it's like I'd never heard somebody saying that anti-discrimination laws are bad, and I got convinced in that. And then I joined his server and ended up reading. I was convinced to read a book by my friend Idlework. He told me to read this book, what's it called again? The Ethics of Anarcho-Capitalism by Chris Bohrer, and that convinced me on anarcho-capitalism. And that's actually a very radical, like theory type book. So it's a very good introduction, actually. It's also a very nice read as well. So that is kind of how I went into anarcho-capitalism, and then later on, I watched some Peikoff lectures, which convinced me of the objectivism.
By the way, just real quick, Dan, I just wanted to say something for the people in the chat who have left super chats, and I usually do read super chats right away, but I'm trying to leave audience Q&A for the end. But again, everyone, if you leave questions, super chats, I will read them once we get to that portion. So I just wanted to put that reminder for people.
So John Stossel is kind of like your gateway drug. Would you consider John Stossel to be radical?
I don't know. He doesn't really talk about philosophy a whole lot. He just gives examples of clearly very terrible things happening, which just kind of the viewer themselves can abstract out the case of why that's terrible. He doesn't really give a whole lot of a positive case on why it's terrible. You can just see it with your eyes.
So what if he was not radical? What if he was not philosophically grounded well? Do you think things would have been better if another Liquid Zulu at the time had canceled him, and then you never came across his stuff, and you never went on this intellectual journey?
Yeah, if he was actively using a prominent position in the libertarian movement, if he was actively using that to try and, pardon me, destroy libertarianism, or whether deliberately or not, then yeah, I would want someone to go out there and criticize him, and then maybe, you know, after I see a John Stossel video, I would see like, hey, what's all this about canceling John Stossel? I like John Stossel. Then I go and watch that video and get, you know, get all this philosophy all of a sudden. That would massively shortcut my route to being a radical anarcho-capitalist.
But what if he had been driven out of the movement such that you never even saw his video, and so you never even entered this rabbit hole?
Well, then I wouldn't have entered the rabbit hole. Ideally, you know, the people at the head, the figureheads, would actually just from the get-go be preaching the radical message. Yeah, ultimately, that would be the ideal case. But worse than that is going to be them using a prominent position and using it against libertarianism, because that makes libertarians in name only. And it's very hard to get out of that hole unless there's somebody like me shouting and screaming, waving my arms, be like, hey, there's an elephant in the room here. There's such a thing as radicalism.
So if he wasn't radical, and if he wasn't like super well philosophically grounded, and he still like made like the good point that resonated with you, it just seems that it wasn't a hindrance to you, because he wasn't talking about philosophy, that he was talking about this thing that he was right about, and that's what influenced you, and that sent you down the rabbit hole, and then you found people who were philosophers, and that you were grounded. So for me, that's the question of whether someone is a force for good. That you know, Jacob said himself that Dave Smith was his gateway drug because of things that he was sound on. And, you know, presumably Jacob doesn't think of himself as like non-radical and non-philosophically grounded. So
I mean,
I just, yeah.
To take the moderator hat off just for a moment, it's actually worse than that, because Dave Smith is my intro drug into looking into libertarian ethics and philosophy, which is how I ran into Zulu and all of his content. So, you know, like, you know, Zulu kind of put you in an awkward place where actually and presumably I'm not the only one. I actually think I know of at least one more person, and probably several in like your Discord servers and in people who are taking your side on this, who their intro into libertarianism was Dave Smith. And so it does seem to me to be at least a little bit ironic that you seem to be saying that the thing that Dan is saying can happen, or sorry, Dan is talking about this kind of thing in a hypothetical sense, but like, I don't think it's hypothetical. I think it has happened and is still happening. That there's people who get brought in by someone who's not a philosopher, and then they go and check out philosophers who are probably going to, like, it makes sense that the actual philosophers are going to be better on philosophy than the people who are out there doing the punditry and the debates on the issues, who are reading philosophers, but maybe they don't have, you know, everything perfect. But
so let's in our mind's eye picture the prototypical John Stossel video. I posit that he says the word libertarianism roughly 0 times in that prototypical video. He really doesn't say, and here's the libertarian answer to this thing. Normally, I mean, from the videos I've seen, maybe I'm misremembering or something, but from the videos I've seen, he just goes, hey, look, this is this state regulation going on over here. Look at this regulation, and here are the effects that it's having, and so on and so forth. He doesn't really say, and here's why you got to be a libertarian for blah 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 blah. Like, he doesn't really take that step at all. So if John Stossel had at no point called himself a libertarian, and he was just like, a small government Republican or whatever, right? I don't think that would have changed my progress towards anarcho-capitalist one iota. What he calls himself wouldn't have changed anything. But what it would do in the case of Dave Smith is that suddenly people would no longer be confused about what libertarianism is. People are right now very, very confused. I was watching Fabian Liberty stream the other day, and he was saying how, like, 9 times out of 10 when he goes on a debate channel, on a debate panel, the people there just have no clue what libertarianism even is because of people like Dave Smith. They have so many misconceptions because Dave Smith is pushing himself as the most consistent libertarian out there, and that is causing horrendous amounts of misunderstanding. So
Could we
people
press
think,
you
oh, I'm
for
already a libertarian. It's fine.
could we press you for an example beyond just maybe the obvious of the immigration issue?
Well, more fundamentally, it would be as pragmatism. I think the immigration issue is the easiest example there is. That's the one I really dig into in the video. I can't think of any others off the top of my head because, again, I don't really watch Dave Smith a whole lot.
Okay. I did remember my question for Dan, and since I did sort of unmoderate myself to ask a more question in one side of the direction, I'm going to ask my question for Dan because I think it is actually a strong question in the other direction. Dan, what would you say to the concern that even if Dave is really good on being anti-war and pushing people in that direction, we as libertarians know, as the old saying goes, that where goods and people do not travel when it comes to borders, that then tanks and soldiers will. And there is a strong case to make that the more we give into this sort of protectionist, isolationist strain that's cropping up on kind of the right and the left, to be honest, in Western societies and here in America, and we have more tariffs and more immigration control, that this not only creates things in terms of the increase of tyranny on the domestic population, on the immigrants, but there's a downstream effect of harsh immigration controls that can lead to increasing the likelihood of either open war or just more military interventions and conflicts. So one could argue that Dave's inconsistency on the immigration issue might actually be undermining his anti-war advocacy and thus his effectiveness as a force for good there. So what would you say to that?
I think that connection that you make is a danger, is definitely a danger. But again, I just don't see him as having that much influence on the borders question. So I just don't see his influence there outweighing what the impact that he mostly has, and from what his focus has been, which is on foreign non-interventionism.
So he might not have much influence on the borders question as far as non-libertarians are concerned, because most non-libertarians are already in total agreement with him, because they're all protectionists. Most people are protectionists. But he does have a whole lot of influence on the borders question within the movement, and that's a very dangerous thing, because he is basically, up until this point, the bordertarians, as you might call them, they have been under this illusion that the open borders crowd, they're just all stupid. They're all silly. They're all a bunch of leftists. They don't have any decent arguments because he's been platforming only those most terrible arguments he can find and batting it down as almost a straw man come to life. Whereas he will actively try and use his massive size to smother and keep down actual radical arguments from people like me and others in my crowd.
I think that is a fair point. I think that the influence within the libertarian movement is probably greater. I just still don't think it outweighs the foreign policy influence. But I do have one question, though. You mentioned that you don't watch much of Dave Smith's content. and how to proclaim someone as a poison to as a poison to liberty. I mean, I don't want to sound like Douglas Murray and like, have you ever been like, how have you ever seen
It's the, it's, the
Dave
po-
Smith's?
it's the podcast version. Have you ever watched him?
Have you ever seen a Dave Smith video?
Yeah.
But I mean, I think that would kind of, especially if you're fixating on like certain particular clips, and not getting, because I am a regular consumer, and so that's why, I mean, I'm not, I don't have like a dog in this fight, and I don't have sort of like, what I'm trying to say is that, like, even when I just try to put on the hat of like, Dave Smith not being like being a force for evil, it just doesn't make sense. It's just honestly myself, I just don't believe that, and I think I have a pretty good moral compass, and I watch a lot of his content, and so I think that just, having watched a lot of it, of his content, I mean, and these quotes that I've given, I have more that those are just quotes of just sort of like moments that just stuck with me. Like, I didn't do research to find like, oh, where's good killer quotes from Dave Smith. So I just think that it just kind of lends credence to my side of this debate, that I have watched a lot of his content, and I have sort of like a more well-rounded view of what he says and what kind of an impact that he's making on the discourse than you seem to have.
So I will say that, first of all, I don't have to watch his content at all to see the impact he's having. Every single day, I get like a few dozen, like, buzzing bees in my mentions. That's been for quite a while, who are all sucking the cock of Dave Smith and giving me terrible, terrible subversions to the theory. I've seen it for ever since Dave started going hard against us, which, by the way, he did before we went hard against him. I've seen this all every single time when this border debate gets brought up. You see all the Dave Smithians in the replies, and they're all making the same arguments, the same terrible arguments that I've debunked a million times already, and it's all the same nonsense. So I've seen all that, and I will be clear here. When I was making the video, I watched many hours worth of Dave Smith content. I did, specifically focus on videos which are relevant. I didn't watch just like, here's me and Robbie the Fire shooting the shit for an hour. It's like, okay, well, that doesn't really get me anything. I was specifically looking for videos which pertain to the topic and seeing what he says, namely the topic of pragmatism. Right, I look for videos which I thought would highlight what I'm saying, and sure enough, every single time, 10 times out of 10, when it was something adjacent to pragmatism, he, like clockwork, he did exactly what I predicted he would do, and that's why it made it very easy for me to draw out the case in the video.
Do you get the impression that these people who are blowing up your mentions are libertarians who have been swayed against immigration by Dave, or that they are populist conservatives who have been swayed more towards libertarianism by Dave?
I would say most of them are in the latter camp, but with an addendum that I don't think they've necessarily been swayed more towards libertarianism. I think a lot of them now call themselves libertarians, but when you look at their positions, it's like, which one's the libertarian position here?
See, that, I mean, that, I just don't see what's wrong with that. Like, I don't see what's wrong with making people more libertarian like, I don't see what's wrong with that. Like, and if, you know, yes, it would be better if we to make them completely libertarian, but I don't see it as like violating principle. Like, yeah, it would be violating principle to then, you know, make them less libertarian on in one way and more libertarian in another way. But, you know, it's not his fault. It's not like if the vector of change is a libertarian direction, like I don't see what's wrong with that, and I don't see what, like, I think that's more of an important thing to happen than, you know, the fact that, you know, some people are like identifying with libertarianism. Like,
So,
yeah,
to whatever extent he is bringing these people in the movement, if you just focus 100% on that, tunnel vision in on that, then yeah, it definitely does look good. It's look all these people he's you know, pointing to in a libertarian direction. He's applied this force in the libertarian direction. But what the context that ignores is that where are they going towards? Well, they're going barreling straight at the vanguard and making the vanguard completely disinterested in the movement anymore. Gee whiz, when you lose the vanguard, that's the death of the movement right there. The movement's dead. There can be no motion anymore.
what do you mean by barreling towards the vanguard?
I mean, I've experienced this many times where, you know, if I wasn't a content creator, if I didn't immediately find these radical libertarians, I would have just assumed the libertarian movement is nothing. There's like, what's going on here? This is a lame movement here. If I had been on my own, so again, that's why I've got to shout very, very loudly, like, "Hey guys, the vanguard's still here! Everybody, look, look, look!" Because other than that, you know, if you're just going along and it's like, okay, I've got this big crowd and they're all calling themselves libertarians, and I walk up to one of them and start talking to them, it's like, okay, well, that seems like a completely unlibertarian position. And I go to the next one, okay, well, that seems like a completely, and you know, it takes me like 10 people before I can find an actual libertarian. Well, that gives me a much higher opportunity cost to actually then develop the theory, because, you know, it takes multiple people bouncing ideas off of each other to fully develop the theory. So you're basically sapping the movement of motion.
Well, can I have a quick question of clarification, which I kind of feel like I know the answer, but I think this will bolster to make sure you guys don't talk past each other. How do you define a libertarian, Zulu? Because I think there's a sort of nominal sense of like libertarian is a label for people who say they want smaller government or no government, and so people will just say like, you know, minarchists, anarchists, even maybe sometimes constitutionalists are, you know, in this camp of libertarian. But I know you might take a more philosophical approach and say, well, libertarians are those which adhere to a libertarian philosophy, which you would probably define as explicitly anarchist. And I kind of like, you know, I just gave two different definitions, which I kind of agree with in different ways. But how would you define that?
So the way I would define it, I'll just take the definition I gave in my opening statement. Libertarianism is the philosophy of the non-aggression principle. That's I think is a pretty good definition of libertarianism, and in fact, it lines up with Dave Smith's definition of what libertarian is.
Yeah, and I agree that the non-aggression principle, that anything agreeing with that is libertarian, and anything disagreeing with that is by definition not libertarian.
But
When
like
in
sorry, but just like are minarchists libertarians then? Like you could make a pretty strong case that they're not, because they still want a state. They want something that violates the non-aggression principle. So I think it's useful here because like if we're going to talk about like people not being libertarians, like I just want to know like who is firmly in and outside of this camp.
I think that the stance of pro-monopoly government is itself not libertarian. But in terms of like what you call people like I was when we were debating last night on a stream, like I was making the point that for me, words are meant for communication and for clarity. And I think that you can make clear that some particular stances that someone who calls themselves a libertarian hold are not libertarian, and you can make clear what like libertarianism as a doctrine is. But like, you know, there are like multiple definitions of words, and there are different ways that people like use words. And so when if someone who holds non-libertarian views like calls themselves a libertarian, that's just useful in a practical sense, that you know, I'll be able to know that okay, well, they're not like a pro-war conservative, probably. I guess like a lot of times that's not actually the case, but it communicates sort of the tendency of their thought in the same way that like calling oneself a conservative might communicate the tendency of one's thought, or the calling themselves a left liberal. Maybe that left liberal harbors libertarian views, but and actually rejects some left liberal views. Like, I don't see it helpful for communication for that left liberal to then say, like, have to come up with some other term. And then we have like a proliferation of terms, as many as there are people. Like just for just basic understanding, like I think it's fine for words to have multiple meanings, and to just be clear about what you're saying when you try to make the case for what is like libertarian doctrine.
So I think this actually relates to something you were saying earlier, that you're less concerned about labels and names and more about beliefs. And in fact, somebody in my chat did a nice little joke to this, to what I'm kind of getting at here, where he said, kind of a problem I see which could arise is libertarians are people who identify as libertarians. You know, like a woman is someone who identifies as a woman. It's like, okay, well then what are they identifying as? So I think that can be very damaging. If you actually get something like that, it's very, very damaging, because these words, they're not just, you know, to kind of vague, oh, he's vaguely in this area. That's bad for us if libertarian becomes ever more and more vague, as more and more people can be herded into the tent, because it hinders the ability of this philosophy to spread. It's because it's not just about a label here. It's about the integrity of what that label signifies, the integrity of the philosophy. And if the philosophy loses integrity, well, you've got two options there. Either you can try and oust the infiltrators, which the Mises Caucus tried to do, and which I'm trying to do right now, or you have a schism and you break off and form some new philosophy, which, you know, this is a Christian show. The Christians, obviously, they like to do that all the time, forming all these new churches.
We'll call it the Napatarians now. So I do want to get to audience questions soon. I had kind of like one more question for each of you that I kind of thought of in this back and forth. So, you know, Dan, what would you say, you know, is it perhaps like if you're going to argue that Dave is a force for good, which, you know, I think people know I'm generally on that side, but would you agree that even if it's not Zulu, that in general, that perhaps Dave, because he is the most kind of like forward facing person of our movement, like a champion of our movement, right? That has he done a good enough job, you know, doing, I'm jumping ahead. Should he then kind of be required, or at least obligated, to have kind of like the theorists and the philosophers of today in the libertarian world, on his show, and have conversations with them, or even if it's just behind the scenes, but to some extent to kind of like, hey, I want to make sure that like I am, for two reasons. One, to kind of like be constantly and I try to do this, right? I'm constantly trying to sharpen my understanding of the philosophy to make sure I'm representing it well in all different areas. Like, because there's always new things, right? Like the COVID lockdowns was a test, and not everyone who was, if you weren't up to the snuff on your theory, you were going to get that wrong. Cryptocurrency, as that came new, we saw some people who were generally good, then suddenly be anti-crypto. So do you think Dave has perhaps a responsibility to do that, and has he maybe not done a good enough job in, in engaging and having on, libertarians, especially like libertarian critics, to sort of, hash out these sort of like philosophical discussions and disagreements?
I don't think obligation or responsibility is really applicable here. I mean, it's not for me to judge. I mean, we all have limited time. We all have different focuses, and you can't like focus on every one thing. Like I I I personally like to do that myself when I in like articles I write and lectures that I give. Um and I'm not, and then so again, I just think that Dave Smith is a force for good because he is spending a lot of times doing a good thing. And so for me to then say like, well, like you should do these other good things instead of some of the time that you've spent on those first
It's
good things. Like I just
there's a fair point there where like he is super busy, and I get that. I mean, I know that because I know him. And I'm not saying he should like every person who comes at him and says, "Dave, I disagree with you. Debate me, bro." That would be silly for him to indulge all of that. But uh, I don't know. I think there's perhaps a fair, at least concern, even by people who are fans of him, to be like, maybe he should spend a little bit more time talking about the theory or having the theorists on his show. But I understand what you're saying. Zulu, my question is kind of in the form of reading a quote, because I was trying to think of where I heard him most recently talk about libertarian theory, and it was when he was on Theo Vaughn's show earlier this year. So I'm going to read this quote to you and just get you to evaluate where you think Dave is right, where he's wrong in terms of representing libertarian theory to people on these big stages. Quote, to me, it's basically it's the belief in self-ownership and non-aggression and private property. Basically, the idea of libertarianism is that you own your body, you own your life, and you ought to be free so long as you're not impeding on the rights of other people. You ought to be able to do whatever you want to do. And so the belief in free market capitalism and in peace, in non-intervention, and basically the idea of what most people think of Americanism is. You have freedom of speech, you have the right to own a gun, you have the right to own property, and the role of government is to protect people's liberty. Government shouldn't be doing anything more than that. If they're doing anything more than that, they've become tyrannical no matter what. If government's doing anything more than just protecting property or protecting people, then it's always at the expense of someone. Even if they're giving somebody something, that means that they're taking it from somebody else because they don't actually make or have anything themselves. So evaluate Dave from a perspective of libertarian theory in terms of, he's got a big platform already. He's on Theo Vaughn, who's got, I think, millions of listeners. So he just introduced millions of people to libertarianism. Did he do a good job there? Go ahead and give us your thoughts.
Sure. So there are obviously some nitpicks. For instance, you ought to be able to do whatever you want to do. I don't think he meant that literally. I think he probably just misspoke. I don't think he actually believes that you should be allowed to do whatever you want to do.
Well, he said free as long, and he said you ought to be free to do whatever you want to do so long as you're not impeding on the rights of other people.
Okay, I didn't note that down. So yeah, of course. So I would say it's fine. Self-ownership, non-aggression, private property. I would say if I'm being pernickety here, self-ownership and private property, I think, are both strictly derivable from the non-aggression principle. I think the non-aggression principle is the fundamental, and obviously, I don't think that there is any legitimate role for government, but whatever, that's fine. Obviously, he is an anarchist as well, so maybe he's just trying to, I suppose it would be nice if he would draw out the implication of, and actually, there is no such thing as a government which protects property rights, right? Unless maybe he's using government in like the more, somehow some people say that government is just anything which governs, like, and govern maybe means just,
Yeah, there's different ways of doing that. Like we here at LCI, we prefer to say governance and not government, but there are some libertarians who just like to say, yeah, we're anarchists and we just believe in market government, right? Or that there's you and I have had discussion over like polycentric versus acentric governance and legal orders and things like that. But I don't know. I just think that's an example where I mean anyone can nitpick anything anyone says, but just seemed to me to be an example where
it's a fine quote. I mean, he said a very similar thing on the Reason Just Asking Questions podcast. So I imagine this is something he probably says somewhat regularly. If he's
is that a force for? I mean, is the fact that Dave's going on these big shows and giving answers like this, is that a net positive for liberty and for good in a libertarian sense?
That specifically, if you zoom in on that, then yeah, it's good to go on big shows and say that libertarianism is yada yada yada. That's fine enough. But I don't think that's all that he does. I think the other stuff he does, he packages together this definition of libertarianism with a pragmatism, which is utterly deadly to the libertarian movement.
All right, I don't want to belabor too much, but Dan, if you want to go ahead and ask, I'm going to start pulling up audience questions. If you want to ask Zulu, one of you ask each other a question while I start putting audience questions in the queue, and then we'll start addressing them.
So Zulu, I don't understand why you don't welcome mentions from people who are trying to work out their understanding about borders. I mean, it just seems to me that that is a great opportunity, especially like, I mean, for someone to, as opposed to like virtue signal on, especially, well, I don't know how much of these mentions are DMs, but especially to the extent that they're DMs, that it just shows sort of like an actual curiosity and not just trying to like virtue signal to like to own a open borders person.
Sure. Maybe I should clarify.
Go ahead.
Like,
okay.
When I was talking about all these like buzzing bees and stuff, I'm not talking about the people who are just genuinely coming in. You can tell this like immediately whether someone's coming in and genuinely wants to discuss something. I'll discuss that all day long with people. I accept debates. I've recently had to stop accepting debates with literally anyone because just you run out of time eventually. But for the longest time, literally anybody could come to me and debate me on any topic they wanted. I'm absolutely fine with that. And sometimes I will get DMs where they're like asking me in good faith, like, "Hey, how do you blah 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 explain this?" And I will like point them off to resources and like explain my position. I totally welcome that. What I don't welcome is the type of people who come in. You can clearly see that, okay, this person's not interested in actually discussing this. They are just interested in sort of trying to smear me and, try and basically be a subverter.
I see.
All right. I have some questions already start up, as well as the super chats. I'll start with the super chats just because they paid to insert a comment or question. This is more just a comment from Fountainhead Forum. He said, if not for the fiasco with Mark Victor in Arizona, Dave Smith would have had a lot more support for president. That ended my honeymoon with the LPMC. That was even a controversial move within the LPMC. Dave actually got on a a donor call with the Mises or like a member call with the Mises Caucus people, and there were plenty of people within the caucus who were also not exactly in favor of what Dave did there. But that's in the past and it happened. Let's see here. I have this comment starred. This is less of a question, but a comment maybe you guys can respond to. So the average person has no idea who the great philosophers were. They absorb philosophy from media and popular influencers. I think this was kind of getting to, I think, Dan, you were kind of saying that people don't necessarily have to get their philosophy from Dave Smith. They can get it from elsewhere. But I guess the point maybe Zulu is making that Artemia Selena, or I don't know how to pronounce it. Hopefully that's close enough. Is saying here with this comment is that, well, they're still absorbing Dave's presuppositions and philosophical, sort of framework, even if he's not saying it explicitly. So if there's anything off with that framework, they might be absorbing that same error. So you want to say something to that, Dan, and then Zulu, you can say something to that, and then I'll go to the next comment.
Yeah, I just don't see how, just like the mechanism of absorbing presuppositions. Like I've never absorbed a presupposition before. Like I don't see how, like, that Redditor who thought that Dave made a really strong moral argument about like anti-war, like how do they even know his presuppositions? Like how do they even know, sort of like, for example, the like his understanding of property rights, or his understanding of the NAP? I mean, there are presuppositions that are visible through that particular thing that he said, but those aren't like even presuppositions. They're just suppositions. They're like premise. Well, they're presuppositions, but they're stated presuppositions. What my point is that people don't absorb implicit presuppositions, and I think that the stated presuppositions in like that quote of my example are all good. They presuppose that there is such a thing as universal morality, for example, which is all to the good.
So I would say I completely agree with Artemia Salina that the average person has no idea. They've never bothered developing philosophy. Which, to be fair, if you're a goddamn neurosurgeon, 60 hours a week, you might not have. You've got to have some sort of division of labor there. Not everybody can study philosophy particularly deeply. And yeah, I think the latter point is true, that they do absorb philosophy from the media and popular influencers, and I think they even either they're absorbing the explicit suppositions, which Dave is, when he's explicitly saying endorsing pragmatism. I think a lot of them have definitely absorbed that from him. And also, even if they aren't, even with all of his implicit suppositions, he isn't getting them to check their premises. He's not getting them to deeply think about these things. So, and that's the problem. These people, they come in, and then we just got all these subverters in the movement, and that's sort of the danger that I see.
Okay. There was a 1999 super chat from Pyritic Batman. This one was for me, so I guess I will answer it. But since you guys are on the stage with me, you guys can comment on my answer if you want. It says, question for Mr. Winograd. Man, no one calls me Mr. Winograd. Not even in Sunday school when I teach on Sundays do they call me Mr. Winograd. I feel old. In your stream talking about Zulu's video, you said something along the lines of, I care about theory, but I also want to live in reality. Could you elaborate on that statement? I mean, I've said something like that before. I don't know if I said that on that stream, but I think that I kind of see a lot of good faith concerns on all sides of this kind of debate here. Because on one hand, I'm very concerned about getting libertarian theory right, like Zulu is, and I think like Dan is too. I'm also concerned about this archetype, which I know some people hate, And fair enough, maybe, because the guy who made this term kind of went on to sort of like become very anti-libertarian. But there's this trope of like, maybe like, are we in danger of living in Ancapistan in our heads, where I don't know, like, and I've heard the Isaiah's job argument and all that, and I think there's merit to it, but I guess I'm just not convinced it's a given that the path to a free society or a freer society is linear. And we don't live in a libertarian world. We live in a very statist world. And I don't know that every move can be this perfect gradualist, incrementalist move away from aggression. I'd like to believe it could be, but I guess I'm just not. I just don't take that as a given. And so sometimes I do, and it's also, I think, complicated when you're evaluating different issues, right? Like, what has more impact, the American empire or immigration? I think Zulu and I kind of maybe differ on this, because on Dave's comment of bring the entire military home and put them on the border, I'm inclined to go, I'll take that trade-off. I think Zulu says, no, that's a horrible trade-off, because you're going to destroy the last bastion of capitalism in the world. So this is where it gets muddy in terms of evaluating what issues are more important, as well as just kind of your presuppositions about what we have to do and what is allowable from a libertarian view. Because to me, I guess there's the theory, the legal theory in terms of ethics, and then there's not pragmatism, but just in terms of like, what can we do in the here and now? And so people might say they're being pragmatic when they consider, well, what can we do right now? Of all available options, which ones are the best? Might not be good, but that might be all you have. So I guess that's an answer. But you, Zulu and Dan, feel free to chime in and add anything you want to that.
I would just say really quick, theory, insofar as it's correct, is theory about reality. There is no distinction. There is no contradiction between the moral and the practical. The moral is the practical. If the theory is true, then that means it does pertain to reality. That's what truth means.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that.
Fair enough. We're not here to discuss my views on theory versus pragmatism, but it was asked of me, so I wanted to honor the questioner and give him his answer. A couple more super chats here. Chuck Unmoney, or Chuck and Money, I guess is the right way to read it. $5. Thank you for that. The White Pillbox channel for the Myth of Political Authority series and a take on Dave Smith. I guess he's making a recommendation for another take on Dave Smith. So thank you for that, Chuck and Money. Chuck and Money again, another super chat, said, look at the Zero Aggression Project. Libertarian purity tests do not exist. That's from Grace Archie with Jim Babka, touches on this issue. I love Jim, had him on my show. Big fan of the Zero Aggression Project. I think Jim and I are more directionally aligned in terms of how we kind of evaluate the libertarian sort of like if you want to call it libertarian purity testing, in terms of like how we align with people and how we work directionally towards a free society. So might be someone you might be interested talking to sometime, Zulu, if you've not heard of Jim Babka and his Zero Aggression Project. It might be worth at least reading and seeing where you agree and disagree. But thank you for the $5 super chat, Chuck and Money. Casimir, mutual friend of Zulu and I, provocateur, libertarian jurist, and debate me bro. I don't know how to introduce you, Casimir, without your full title. So I think I got all of it there. Dan, is cancer beneficial to the body nominally growing? Why does Smith platform every enemy but never Kinsella, Papa, Zulu, Dominiak, Block, etc.? So I guess this gets to something even I was asking. Like, is it? Maybe it's too strong to say. Is there an obligation or responsibility? But I mean, listen, I'm a fan of Dave Smith. I'm a fan of his show. I watch almost every episode, and even just from like a educational entertainment value, I think it'd be cool if Smith had Kinsella or Hoppe, if he'd be willing to have it on, and more libertarian theorists. I think I think it's unlikely to happen, but I think in a universe where Zulu and Dave got past their grievances and just had a talk about theory, even if they disagreed, I'd find that interesting and edifying to listen to. So, but go ahead, Dan, and give us your answer to that.
So I don't see it as platforming. I mean, a lot of these people that he's having on, they have their own platforms. They're already platformed. I so, for example, you know, when he has Tucker Carlson on, or when he goes on Tucker Carlson, he doesn't agree with everything Tucker Carlson believes and says. Like, Tucker Carlson is very protectionist in terms of even trade, and so, but what I see Dave Smith just talking with him, and kind of establishing a rapport based on things that they agree on, and being an influence on things where he is like close, and making him better on that. So like, I talked about how Dave Smith was a huge influence on Candace Owens becoming non-interventionist. And again, like, maybe you think Candace Owens is a irresponsible conspiracy theorist. Well, would you rather have a pro-war conspiracy theorist with a huge audience, or an anti-war one? And obviously, for me, it would be an anti-war one, especially like in terms of the kind of influence that is then spread throughout that entire audience. And like, would he have had that kind of impact if he just tried to alienate her and never went on her show, and just treated her as an enemy? It's like, no. And the influence that he's had on her is to the good. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Tucker Carlson has evolved so much on his foreign policy. Like now, like he used to be for the Iraq War. He used to be really bad on war, and now he's saying things like it's always wrong to kill innocents. And so yeah, so I and even things like Nick Fuentes, for example. Go ahead.
If I can, Dan, I don't know, because I think maybe the question, maybe you confused his intent here, because I know there's people who are giving Dave crap for platforming certain people, but I don't think Casimir's point is that he shouldn't talk to those people, but why doesn't he also, because I mean, now I think Dave did a collab with Cancelo a long time ago, but it's been a long time. I don't think there's been anything recent where Dave has had Cancelo or Hoppe or Block, or I think he has Scott Horton on. He's had Keith Knight on. So he's guys from the Libertarian Institute on, who I think are really good. So it's not that he doesn't have any libertarian like any libertarians out there who are out there doing their own writing on economics or foreign policy or theory. I know Keith Knight wrote his own book on like libertarianism. I forget the name of the book. It's a very good book. But yeah, I don't know. I think the question was kind of like wouldn't it be cool? Like, and listen, some of this is me like with my moderately sized platform, like telling Dave with his huge platform what to do, right? So like take it with a grain of salt. Like, I'm not trying to sit here and be like I'm an expert on how to run a podcast, right? But I just in terms of like my own libertarian nerdism, that like if he had Candace on, or even Fuentes on, or Tucker on, and then like follow that up after he gets all this influx of new people paying attention to him, to be like, now I'm going to have Hoppe on or Kinsella on and talk about the theory, or have Dan Sanchez on and talk about economics, right? Or like I think that would be, I think that'd be cool. That'd be a way to like ride the momentum of what he's doing, which I think is mostly positive. So but I think that's kind of what Casimir is asking is, is it like it? I think it would be fair if Dave platformed some of these people a little bit more, or at least talk to them in some capacity.
Yeah, I mean, I just like, it's like, it's his show. It's like, we, if we want to do that, we could start our own show and invite those people and have that balance. Like, I just I just really
for sure. For
yeah.
sure, it's his show. I don't think anyone's saying he has to. I just, again, for me, it's more the nerd thing. Like, I would like to see Dave interact with these people, but we don't have to belabor the point. Zulu, if there's anything you want to add to that before I move on.
Yeah, I do think there is some amount of burden on him if he's going to brand himself as the most consistent motherfucker you know. He does take on to himself a burden to actually keep up with the libertarian theory and not just stick with the sound bites. If he's not keeping up with the theory, then he's got to drop that branding immediately. That's a point I kind of hammer home in the video.
I mean, it's like, and I'm trying to figure out a way to say this in the right way, because like I don't want to come across as like telling Dave what to do. He's a grown man. He has his own platform, way bigger than mine. So like, this is like Monday morning quarterbacking, right? But I think that, yeah, I think that, it's not even like an obligation thing. I just think it would be, there would be a lot of positives that would come from it. And like Dave even says, on many occasions, that like, I'm not a philosopher, I'm not an economist, I'm a guy who's read all these economists and political theorists and philosophers and historians, right? Like he has Scott Horton on his show, he has Daryl like, and to fair, I think part of Dave's thing here is that his like laser focus is foreign policy, and fair enough, right? And so he does have a lot of experts on to talk about foreign policy, but insofar as economics and political theory matter too, it would maybe be cool for him to have some of those on. But I think we've beaten that point sufficiently to death, so I will move on to another comment. We got about 12 minutes here, 15 minutes here left or so. Although we are going to do closing statements, so probably need to give you guys at least like 5 minutes each for closing statements. So we'll do like, yeah, 3 to 5 minutes more of going through the questions. I want to be respectful to both of your times. Scroll back up. I think we're done with the super chat. I'm gonna prioritize the comments that are actual questions. This is something you got asked, I think, on Jose's show, Zulu. But what does Zulu think about Malay? He's been accused of being a Prague before and also not being an Austrian.
So I think the correct stance on Malay is, first, it was very, very good thing that he was elected and his party came into power. The unbelievable improvement over the Peronists, right? That's the first thing. Now I think it's fine if someone wants to criticize Malay the person, because I mean, Fabian Liberty pointed this out, that apparently he doesn't even call himself a libertarian anymore. He calls himself a paleo-libertarian. So sure, there are definitely things to criticize there. But I think ultimately it's very, very good that LLA is in power.
I mean, Dan, I don't know if you want anything to say to that. I'm not an expert on Malay, and I've seen a lot of claims. I've not exactly fact-checked them all, but I think he's instituted some economic protectionism and some actual like immigration restrictions, as well as now, granted, there's a gang violence problem there, right? But in terms of like creating a more police-like state in Argentina, I think this is something where it does stand to point, and maybe Zula, you can just say, well, maybe I don't have to defend Malay, but I guess the tension in this question might be like, if we're going to, Malay went out there and was like, I'm an anarcho-capitalist, and my philosophy is that of, Murray Rothbard and Hoppe and Mises. And so if he's out there, governing in a way that's kind of contrary to the theory, it seems like you're saying that's bad, but he's still better than what came before, right? So, I mean, that maybe it's not a contradiction, but it's at least like nuance.
Yeah, I'll highlight that nuance too, that like, you know, Milei as a head of state, like endorsing the massacre or genocide in Gaza, and like, to me, that's and calling himself an ANCAP at the same time, to me, that I just don't understand how you can support that and then take such issue with Dave for like when he's not a head of state, when he's and so is less of sort of, and he's a figurehead in terms of like anarcho-capitalism, in terms of like reputational damage to it.
Well, I mean, fundamentally, I don't speak Spanish, so I wouldn't be able to make however many long hours video on Malay because I don't speak Spanish, and there's a whole lot of. I've definitely seen a lot of socialists who are they're actively misrepresenting the situation, and it becomes incredibly difficult to sort through propaganda when you don't goddamn speak the language. Like, so I'll leave that to Spanish speakers to deal with.
I mean, I think we should look more into this, but I'll grant you that it's the language barrier is troubling. But this is AI transcripts are quickly making that less of a problem. We're going to do two more comments here, just from some two people I really like who I think brought up interesting questions or comments. So first will be from my co-patriot here at LCI, Carrie Baldwin. She said, libertarians getting upset at the necessarily decentralized nature of political theorizing is puzzling. This is a feature, not a bug. So either one of you, if you want to, I think it's more targeted towards you, Zulu, but if anyone wants to respond to that sort of challenge or potential criticism there.
I mean, yeah, duh. Like theorizing is done in a decentralized fashion, but that doesn't mean that we just throw integrity out the window. I mean, obviously, this is a Christian show. What was the most successful church in the history of the world? Well, it was the Catholic Church. And why were they so successful? Because they were constantly engaged in these purity tests. They didn't allow any subversions to the theology. So that rocketed. They basically controlled all of Europe for, well, like a couple millennia. Like, this is clearly there is something to that. And what there is to that is that you don't just let subverters in. Sure, you let anybody. I think it's proper to let anybody do the theorizing, because obviously I'm not a mystic. I don't think there is like the word of God, which only some people are able to properly interpret or anything like that. But I do think that it is proper to go, well, there is the reality out there. If somebody's bringing some subversion to the theory, it's incumbent upon us to call that out, because if you don't call that out, well, we're in the puzzling situation we're in right now, where libertarianism has this massive tumor which has infected it, and we got to get someone to cut that out, and that's what I'm trying to do.
Dan, anything you wanted to say, or I can move on to the next comment?
No.
Okay. There was a couple of really good comments from Heyman. I'm not going to be able to get to all of them, but I thought this one might be interesting to end on. Might even be future. Maybe I'll start a career hosting libertarian debates, and Heyman and Zulu can come hash this out. But disagree that the NAP is fundamental. It relies on a libertarian conception of property rights. Otherwise, we don't know what action constitutes aggression in the first place. So, Zulu, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I regard that as completely and utterly false. I show in my course how just given the non-aggression principle, you can derive the homesteading principle, you can derive self-ownership, you can derive these things from the NEP. Now, I know that the classical view in the theory was that, well, you need the non-aggression principle and you need private property rights, because then you know what aggression is. But actually, no, you don't need that. If aggression just means the initiation of conflict. Now, where in that definition do I require property rights? Let's just go through it. There's Crusoe and Friday on the desert island. Crusoe walks up. He sees a stick poking out of a tree. He takes that stick and he fashions it into a spear, which he wants to use to spearfish. And as he's walking off the ocean, Friday comes along and tries to grab the stick off of him. Now, it's very clearly a conflict here. Who initiated that conflict? Well, it was clearly Friday initiated the conflict. So we've gotten to the homestead principle purely just from the non-aggression principle. That's all you need to get to it. So I regard Heyman's comment here utterly false.
Gotcha. Anything you want to add to that, Dan?
Well, just it's interesting that we actually, Zulu and I actually debated this exact question in a Hazlitt Fellowship call because, you know, I hadn't even heard of that contention and so because I was of the same school of thought that human nature is of that I've thought that property rights are prior to the non-aggression principle. So it's an interesting question for sure.
Yeah, I think there's different ways of going about this. I mean, I think I've heard it said that people start with self-ownership because self-ownership is more or less self-evident from just the principle of controlling your body. I guess it's kind of like Hoppian argumentation ethics, and then you can just derive private property rights from that. I think they're all, in some ways, some of these are like more clear than others, but I think they all are kind of valid ways of trying to ground the philosophy. You can certainly have your favorite. Guys, there's some questions we didn't have time to get to, but we're already running probably a little bit behind, and I just want to be respectful of their time. I'll read the last super chat here, although I don't think it's really it's. I'm just going to read it because it's a super chat. I don't think we have to respond to it. Why doesn't Dave understand that the two-party system is the problem? I know people who always find a reason to vote for red team back to Nixon. Yeah, I don't. I kind of agree, but I don't know. I don't know that there's an alternate universe where Ron Paul reformed the Republican Party, right? and so like I don't know if it's necessarily like a given that you should never ever consider voting Republican, but I mean I think it's probably true more often than not that you're going to get duped and that you're going to get lied to and whatnot. But I don't know. If you guys have anything you want to say to that, you can, or we can just move on to closing statement.
Yeah, I'm fine to move on.
All right. I did a bad job as moderator, and I didn't ask you guys before how we wanted to do closing, because there is not technically a traditional. There's some people who let the affirmation go first and then the negative case end, or they reverse it. So I will
flip a coin or something.
Dan, unless you object to it, just my personal preference, just when I did debate, is that I would typically flip it at the end. So unless you object, I think I'll let you give your closing statement. Well, no, sorry, that'd be keeping it the same. We'll give Zulu the last word if you're okay with that. We'll just keep the order of affirmative, negative. So go ahead and give your 5-minute closing statement, and then we'll go to Zulu, and then we'll sign off.
Sounds good. So Leonard Read gave a presentation where he would take out an electric candle in a dark lecture hall, and he would slowly turn up the dimmer to make it brighter, and he would point out that the only way that he could make an improvement in the situation that he was in was to cultivate his own light, to increase the light, and that was a metaphor for an individual increasing their own understanding and for general self-improvement. Eventually, the light could get so bright that it could illuminate the space around him enough so that someone else could then find their own candle, and then they could start cultivating their own light by making the light more intense by self-improving. And what that was a metaphor is that he really believed that when you cultivate your own understanding, that and then when you work out your understanding through writing and speech, that inspires other people to then similarly learn, to then cultivate their own understanding. There's no imposing of that light on other people. You can't force it on people. Really, teaching is a function of learning out loud. And so anytime when I see someone trying to impose improvement on someone else, especially through cancel culture, through pestering, through gatekeeping, through bad consequences on their behavior, especially in the realm of intellectual affairs, that I just don't see that as effective. So for me, that's why I'm so like reluctant to presume to know like what would be a better format for Dave's show or a better schedule of guests for Dave's show, because my business is cultivating my own understanding. I think that Zulu has done a great job at cultivating his own understanding, and as a result, he has gained a following of people who are also trying to cultivate their understanding. I think that if Zulu wants to improve by his own measure, Dave, in some sort of way, that I think that he should be the change that he wants to see in the world. Um, I think that Dave Smith has done a tremendous amount of good, and it's not for me to presume how he could do even better. But if there is a way that either Zulu or me or Jacob or anyone can help Dave Smith do something better, it would be to criticize by creating, to do what the kinds of outreach and the kinds of like libertarian cultivation and defending liberties and defending rights that we think would could inspire him to emulate. And so that's sort of my attitude. That's why like I think that it's important to have gratitude, to recognize when people are doing good in the world, and when they are a force for good in the world, and when they are doing heroic things. Again, I think of Dave Smith as a hero, and I think that if we want to inspire them to do even more good and to be even more heroic, we should focus on cultivating our own light.
All right, thank you for that, Dan. We're going to go to Zulu's closing statement next, but just in the name of being unabashed capitalists, I will read the last super chat that snuck in here, which was just another question about the books that we have here at LCI. The only one I have on me at hand, our flagship book, again, Faith Seeking Freedom, Libertarian Christian Answers to Tough Questions, second edition coming out next year. But if you go to libertarianchristians.com, you can find out more about what we do here at the Libertarian Christian Institute, promoting a free society and free market economics from the Christian worldview. And we have other books as well. One of our recent books it's called House Divided, and it was kind of on kind of more of a theological book, but it's on like why the church kind of dropped the ball during COVID. And there weren't more churches standing up against the COVID mandates. So, and more books coming out next year, including the second edition to Faith Seeking Freedom. So now that I'm done with the shameless capitalist grifting, Zulu, go ahead and give us your closing statement.
Sure. So, again, the resolution was Dave Smith is a force for good. Let me just reiterate the flow for that. So the main argument, as far as I see, is that Dave Smith is a force for good because he is a big voice in the anti-war space, and that his anti-war advocacy alone outweighs anything else he might be doing. Now, I will say that in the debate, Dan, in fact, agreed with my statement of the philosophical theory of history. So, if the philosophical theory of history is true, and I iterated that I indeed hold that is true, I said this in the debate, that if the philosophy of the day is what is the fundamental, then Dave Smith cannot be a force for good because he's killing off the libertarian philosophy, meaning it cannot become the philosophy of the day. Now, there are various arguments on whether Dave Smith is indeed damaging the philosophy to this extent. I did not see any definitive statement from Dan showing that indeed he's not a damage to the philosophy. Indeed, he's bringing a lot of people in. That was the funnel argument. He's bringing a lot of people in, but as I showed in this debate, in fact, those people he's bringing in are disenfranchising the vanguard. They're making the vanguard less interested in actually generating any motion. And this is a point I made in the video, that the vanguard, they're not just like the misguided autistic wing, or small, or even like the guiding light of the movement. They are the movement because they're the only ones who generate motion. Everybody else is either entirely irrelevant or an active subverter, damaging the spread of our philosophy. And this is all, again, comes from the philosophical theory of history, which was accepted as true. So, as for his anti-war advocacy, again, that he advocates these anti-war issues is non-fundamental because the philosophical theory of history is true and was accepted as true. That implies that such a peripheral issue as war is entirely unfundamental. What's fundamental is the core philosophy. And what is the core philosophy in question here? It is libertarianism as against pragmatism. That's what really matters in the long run. If we project out a few centuries from now, that's what really matters. Nobody will remember Dave Smith swaying Candace Owens towards being more anti-war. What will matter is what happens on this fundamental philosophy debate. That's what we really will determine the next few centuries going forth. If libertarianism dies here, boy howdy, we're going to be in for a hell of a time in the coming centuries. We will have 20 more Hitlers coming about before anything good can happen. And that strikes me that I can't see any other arguments on the flow apart from the anti-war one. So, given that his anti-war advocacy is in fact non-fundamental because of the philosophical theory of history, I believe that that settles that.
All right. I want to thank both of you for. I want to thank you, Dan, for suggesting this debate, and for me as the moderator, I was happy to be part of this because I think that you are both brilliant libertarians and people that I can learn from, that the audience can learn from. And even though I am, the debate's done, I mean, I think it's probably clear. I side with Dan pretty much on this, but I think that the libertarian movement needs to sometimes learn to grow beyond this sort of like, I don't know, like picking sides and things. And like, I can disagree with people like Zulu on some things. I can disagree with people like Dan. I even disagree with Dave on some things. And I just kind of go, hey, I think that you're all forces for good. I think we're all pushing for a society that's based on free association, on property rights, the non-aggression principle. And even insofar as maybe some of us are inconsistent on those things, we're moving things in the right direction. But this was a very good conversation, very engaged audience. If please, everyone, before you sign off, please make sure that you follow Dan and Zulu on social media. If you guys want to quickly plug where people can find Zulu, where your YouTube channel is and your socials, and Dan, if you want to plug yourself and Fee and anything you have coming up, let's make sure people can follow you guys and keep up on your work.
Sure. So again, my channel is Liquid Zulu. I just searched that up on YouTube. And I also have a free course on libertarian ethics. You can read it for free or pay whatever you want for the video version at liquidzulu.github.io. And that's linked underneath all of my videos as well. And by the way, I just want to mention that all of my videos, the most permissive license that YouTube allows me to give is Creative Commons attribution. But I also have a disclaimer, which I hope, I don't know, I'm not a lawyer, I hope gets rid of the attribution requirement, but I don't know if that's legally binding or not. Just know you're allowed to reuse my videos in whatever way you want. I don't really care much about that. So if you're interested in doing some sort of a reaction or whatever, then go right ahead.
Anti-IP solidarity. Dan, go ahead and plug your stuff.
Yeah, so again, I'm at Feed, and so feed.org/Hazlitt-fellowship is where we have the landing page for applications for that, and applications are open through Friday, so please apply and get those in by Friday. I also have 2 Substacks. One is called Developing Devotion, and that's where I write about my Christian faith. And the other one is called Liberty Letters. Oh, I should get the address first. So devotionals.substack.com for that first one. And then Liberty Letters is where I write about libertarian stuff, libertyletters.substack.com.
Awesome. Thank you guys again for being here, being part of this. Everyone, before you hop off, please make sure that you do all the things, right? Like this video wherever you're watching it, subscribe if you haven't, comment, not just in the live stream, but afterwards as well. Let us know who you thought won this debate, what you thought the most interesting arguments were. All this stuff helps boost this conversation in the algorithms for YouTube and everywhere else. If you're listening on the audio side, 5-star reviews are the way to go for that. That way more people can hear a interesting conversation about libertarianism and the best way to advocate for it in a freer, more peaceful society. If you want to support what we do here at LCI, libertarianchristians.com/donate. And that's all we have for you guys for today. So I'll be back again here Monday night in the green room with a guest who I am just like completely blanking. Oh, I'm having on Jeff Degener, returning guest. He's a fellow at the Mises Institute and a professor at Cornerstone University, and we're going to be debunking Ben Shapiro. So that'll be a good time. Make sure you tune in for that. That'll be at 9:00 Eastern time, and we generally do green rooms every Monday night, but we sometimes do other nights as well, such as tonight. So thanks everybody for tuning in. Thanks again to our debaters, and we'll talk to you again next time. Take care.